Imagine you wake up at 4 a.m. because you've lost your job and you're unemployed. Well, that's what a recession is like, except it's unemployment on a mass scale. And the reason why we need to talk about this today is because we may experience a recession in 2023. If it happens, there's not a lot we can do about it.
I mean, Europe is already in recession, and they're likely to put U.S. in some kind of recession 6 to 9 months from now.
CNBC Fed survey for January sees the recession probability at 51%. You can see that right there, down sharply from 63% in December, but still higher than the normal, which is around here, 25%.
This is the unemployment rate in the US. The grey bars are recessions that the US has experienced since World War II. As you can see, higher rates of unemployment are the hallmarks of a recession. The more people without work, the less we spend, the slower the economy grows.
Okay, so there's basically a bit of a problem with this story, and it's got to do with the US economy.
U.S. employers added 517,000 jobs in January, and the unemployment rate fell to 3.4%. That is the lowest it's been in more than half a century.
The jobs market in the US is absolutely on fire at the moment. 517 jobs were created in January. That's almost twice as much as in December. As the New York Times states, the American labor market unleashed a burst of hiring in January, producing another wave of robust growth even as interest rates continue to rise. So, what's going on? And is there really a risk of a recession? To understand this better, we need to come here.
Good afternoon, and welcome.
So this is Jerome Powell, and he's the chair of the US Federal Reserve.
My colleagues and I understand the hardship that high inflation is causing.
What's interesting is that in his opening remarks, he mentions high inflation. This reveals a lot about what the Federal Reserve is thinking about. This is the core rate of inflation in the US. It's not the headline rate of inflation, which is often quoted in the news. It's the rate of inflation that strips out energy and food inflation because these are considered transitory. It's what the US Federal Reserve worries about, and this has an impact on the interest rates it sets. If you zoom in, you can see that the Federal Reserve is trying very hard to chase this core inflation and bring it under control.
Price stability is the responsibility of the Federal Reserve and serves as the bedrock of our economy. Without price stability, the economy does not work for anyone. Without price stability, we will not achieve a sustained period of labor market conditions that benefit all.
This is the thing about the Fed. It wants to find the right balance that neither overstimulates the US economy or results in a slowdown in economic growth. So it targets what's known as the terminal rate. This is the rate where the Federal Reserve will stop raising interest rates.
I think they are quite committed to getting to a terminal rate that's somewhere over 5. The market does not expect that.
In fact, since the release of these red-hot job numbers, the market is now pricing in an implied terminal rate of just above 5%. The Fed needs to get an overheating labor market under control. Because if it doesn't, US companies might overhire, leading to job losses further down the line. The problem the Fed faces is that the signals used to gauge economic health are very mixed. So let's rewind back a bit and see where these recessionary fears began. Back in late 2022, the yield curve started to invert. Now, you don't really need to understand what the yield curve is, you just need to understand why we look at the yield curve. But I'll give you a brief explanation of roughly what it is and what happens to the yield curve prior to a recession. So this is the yield curve just before the pandemic in 2020. Bond investors look at the yield curve because it shows the yield or income earned on bonds with different maturities. The yield curve should normally slope upwards. This is because investors normally demand a higher return for lending out money for longer. However, if we fast forward to the end of last year, you can see that the yield curve has started to invert or slope downwards. The reason this can happen is because investors start to expect lower economic growth and inflation in the future, and therefore demand a higher return for lending money over shorter periods of time. This is a flight to quality because investors prefer to keep their cash closer to home. This is therefore also a pretty good indicator that we might be about to enter a recession. And we are also starting to see layoffs, such as in the technology sector and among some major financial institutions. The job market appears to be moving at two speeds, overheating in some places, yet retracting elsewhere. Overall, there are just as many bad indicators as there are good indicators. We could have a possible recession or a soft landing. We just don't know. The problem is that there are so many unpredictable variables at play. We could experience more energy shocks from Russia's invasion of Ukraine, or we could experience a boost in economic activity from China as it comes back online, flooding the global economy with demand from the pent-up savings that it acquired during the lockdown. So will we have a recession? Well, we may do, we may not. We may experience a severe recession, a mild recession, or we may avoid it altogether, despite what indicators say. That's the problem with recessions. They're incredibly unpredictable. So what do you think? Please let me know in the comments below. If you like this video, please consider subscribing to this channel. Until then, I'll see you next time.